He's a fearless musical mastermind who's always struggled to go his own way.
You can go your own way.
Everyone wants to break through and sell as many albums as possible. It's just a question of what you're willing to do.
One thing I think you should know.
He just will not let his music go until it's perfect, and even then he doesn't want to let it go because it's so much a part of him.
When I worked with him, I noticed his intensity very much, and personally it frightened me.
The architect of Fleetwood Mac's multi-platinum sound, Lindsey Buckingham transformed band disharmony into rock history.
If you spent 5 minutes looking at these songs, but knowing an inkling of what was going on, I go, oh my God.
I don't think he gets as much credit for really helping create the sound of Fleetwood Mac.
She wrote down, let me in.
Lindsey's big love turned into bigger heartbreak.
Lindsey didn't want this breakup. He didn't want to not be with me.
I think the specter of Stevie probably disabled several long-term relationships I had.
They really do love each other, but they hate each other so much.
And family tragedy marked his music indelibly.
Well, there's a shadow on my daddy's stone.
I don't think Lindsey ever quite got over the loss of his dad.
I think you can feel the agony and the pain coming across in a lot of those songs.
Lindsey Buckingham struggled to maintain musical integrity, but the excess and excess of Fleetwood Mac finally became too much.
Don't say that you love me.
The celebrity part of the gig for him is, I think, the hardest part.
I left because it was a survival move, not just physically, but psychologically.
Now, the story of a musical alchemist who turned personal pain into artistic gold. Lindsey Buckingham, behind the music.
Come on, buddy.
That was a hot shot.
Step on back.
Monday morning, you showed up fine.
Lindsey Buckingham's been a frontman, a heartthrob, and a hitmaker for more than a quarter century.
First you loved me, then you faded away.
He's always been the kind of person who writes music about what he's feeling and what he knows about.
Lindsey has turned the pain of family tragedy, betrayal, and heartbreak into multi-platinum hits.
So many things that were unresolved while I was in Fleetwood Mac only got resolved after I left. You can take Stevie as an example.
Well, it took a long time. I mean, we broke up really in 1976, and I don't think that, either Lindsey and I were really comfortable being around each other for years.
Lindsey walked away from the biggest band in rock and roll and retreated to the one place that was always his refuge from rock star insanity, the recording studio.
He's really best in the studio by himself. That's the way he's worked for a lot of years.
And he's never quite satisfied because he's not sure that he couldn't do better. In a way, I think he torments himself a lot.
Oh, you can get lost in your work for sure. Lindsey's that way. He's a real hard-working guy, and he doesn't quit till he has it right,
Won't you say goodbye to me?
Now, in the spring of 2001, he's completing work on his first solo record in nearly a decade.
I wish I could make records quicker, and maybe someday I'll learn to do that, although I guess I better hurry up.
And now I best be on my way.
It may take time, but Lindsey's working on his own terms and without compromise. And that was not always the case.
Won't you say goodbye to me?
Born on October 3rd, 1949, Lindsey Buckingham was the third and youngest son of Morris and Ruthita Buckingham. Lindsey grew up in the upscale Bay Area community of Atherton, California.
My childhood was pretty idyllic. It was really pretty Ozzie and Harriet. My father was an executive. My mom was a homemaker. We belonged to a country club.
Lindsey and his older brothers, Jeff and Greg, were all competitive swimmers.
I was a swimmer because I was expected to be, because that's what the older brothers had done.
But from an early age, Lindsey found himself drawn to a different game.
I can remember drawing guitars when I was 2 or 3 or 4 years old. I have no idea where any of that came from.
In the mid-50s, the rock and roll revolution arrived at the spacious Buckingham home, hand-delivered by Lindsey's brother Jeff.
I would bring that one little single 45 home, and I would just play it until you couldn't hear it anymore.
Jeff came home one day and said, there's this new guy, Elvis Presley. And so, yeah, suddenly hearing Heartbreak Hotel was just a revelation to me.
Lindsey listened to his brother's records, and at age 6, he taught himself to play guitar. 2 years later, in 1957, Lindsey made his rock and roll debut and stole the show at a talent contest.
He performed a song called Black Slacks, and he was great.
I won that, and that was, I think, much to my mother's dismay. You know, I think she saw the writing on the wall.
Lindsey was far from the only rising star in the Buckingham household. His brother Greg was on the Olympic swim team.
Good start. Remember, this is one length of the boom of each.
He came out of Stanford University and for about a year was considered the best swimmer in the world. He was on Wide World Sports all the time. He ended up getting a silver medal in Mexico City. I felt very overshadowed, you know, being Greg Buckingham's brother.
As Lindsey entered high school in '63, he joined the swim team but continued to rock on the side.
In a way, I was leading a double life. I was doing all of what was expected of me in terms of sharing family activities, athletics, and yet, you know, when I was on my own, I was rebelling against that.
While playing at a church social in '65, 16-year-old Lindsey had his first encounter with a girl who would later figure prominently in his life.
I only met Lindsey once in high school. He was a junior and I was a senior, and he was playing California Dreaming, and I just kind of burst into song and sang the song with him.
She played me one of her songs, which I was quick to critique. Nothing's changed since then. And I think there was kind of a mutual attraction even then, even though it was not acknowledged.
We talked for a minute, and I went away, he went away, and I never really saw him again until almost 3 years later.
In his senior year, Lindsey joined a band with high school classmates Javier Pacheco and Bob Aguirre.
We, I guess you could say a little bit cruelly, chose a name of an actual student, called it the Fritz Memorial Band.
This poor guy was an unassuming, shy person. He must have thought, what did I ever do to deserve this?
Fritz set up shop in the Buckingham's garage with Lindsey on bass and lead vocals.
You know, they practiced there every night, and so I can remember the noise.
The next year, Lindsey and his bandmates went off to college. 19-year-old Stevie Nicks was already part of the student body at San Jose State.
He and his band called me and asked me if I wanted to be in their rock and roll band.
Lindsey and Stevie's musical chemistry was immediately apparent.
The power that you bring. I realized that Lindsey and I had something special. And I think everybody else realized it right away, too. We got lots of jobs. Don't let it go down the drain.
The time had come for Lindsey's double life to end. He called his coach and quit the college swim team.
He said to me something along the lines of, well, you're a loser. You're always going to be a loser. And he hung up on me. And that was that. That was the end of sports for me.
Lindsey soon dropped out to dedicate himself to his music. With Lindsey and Stevie fronting the band, Fritz started to make a name for themselves, opening for acts like Santana, Hendrix, and Janis Joplin.
Any San Francisco band you can come up with, we probably opened for 3 solid years because we were good.
Fritz had the songs, and we had the fan base. I think we could have done something, nationwide.
Although Lindsey was the voice of the band, the words weren't his own.
Lindsey wasn't really the boss of that band. Javier was. Lindsey and I weren't writing for that band. Javier wrote all the songs and ruled the band with an iron hand.
Whatever problems the band members had, they still dreamed of making it big.
It was not beyond the realm of imagination for all of us to think that we were going to make it.
Louisa Joy!
In 1970, Fritz left San Francisco to showcase in L.A. and cut some demos for record producer Keith Olsen.
Oh, Louisa Joy!
We proceeded to cut some demos, and at the end of it, we kind of thought that, wow, this band's not that great, but there are 2 members of this band that are amazing. It was Stevie and Lindsey.
Louisa Joy!
We had to tell the other 3 guys that we loved that we had to break the band up and that Lindsey and I were going to go to Los Angeles.
A new creative duo was about to be born. Coming up, Lindsay and Stevie get drafted into rock's big leagues.
Mick said, those two kids that you play, I think they would want to join my band. I'll never forget that.
But first, Lindsay loses a hero.
Someone has left you alone.
The first time death comes to your door, you always feel that it's not going to happen to anyone around you.
When Behind the Music continues. Singled out for fame, 22-year-old Lindsey Buckingham and 23-year-old Stevie Nicks broke away from their Bay Area band and moved to L.A. in 1971. Before long, their partnership was more than musical.
Stevie and I had worked together for 4 years without ever being romantically involved, and that provided a really strong foundation as lovers and as musical partners.
I was the person who loved Lindsay without him being famous, without him being a millionaire. This was just two kids out of Menlo Atherton High School. So, you know, I loved him for all the right reasons.
Love, my love, she knows how to treat her man.
Their relationship developed as Lindsay's growing musical vision focused Stevie's raw talent.
I was pretty knocked out by her lyrics even back then. I was providing the style in which we would interpret these songs.
So many different kinds.
The very first time I heard Stevie and Lindsay's demo tape, I was just blown away. It was some of the most extraordinary music I think I'd ever heard that wasn't released.
Races are run. Some people win. Some people always have to lose.
The music may have been promising, but the college dropouts were off to a humble start. Their expected record deal was slow in coming. After 2 years in L.A., Lindsay and Stevie finally got a deal with Polydor Records in 1973.
And if you go forward, I'll meet you there.
But the Buckingham Nicks album stiffed.
It's dropped by Polydor. It's out 3 months and it's dropped. And Lindsay and I think that the world has ended because we have had a taste of the finer things and we are back to square one.
Then, just as Lindsay needed his family's support the most, his beloved father, Morris, was struck down by a massive heart attack at the age of 56.
He was in a gas line during the gas shortage in 1974. And Stevie and I got that call, and of course it was a huge, huge shock to me.
I answered the phone the morning that Lindsay's dad died, and I had to hand him the phone, knowing what they were going to tell him.
He was devastated. We all were, because it was so sudden.
The first time death comes to your door in your family, you always feel that it's for the others, that it's not going to happen to anyone around you. And I guess that's part of just a growing up process. It's too bad it had to happen so soon.
I don't think Lindsay ever quite got over the loss of his dad.
After his father's passing, Lindsay redoubled his efforts to achieve musical success.
I would find him in the morning, like having fallen asleep with his guitar on his lap and his hands still in the position of a chord that he was playing when he fell asleep. And he'd get up and he'd just continue playing it.
In 1974, despite the couple's hard work, 4 years of poverty and struggle had begun to take a toll on their relationship.
Sometimes they would be just so close and they'd be working on some music together and inseparable. Sometimes they would just be having a major verbal fight. And it was like being on a seesaw and you never knew which side was going to be up or down.
Fleetwood Mac came exactly at the right time because it was going to start to not be much fun anymore.
Finally, opportunity arrived in the long, tall form of Englishman Mick Fleetwood. Mick met Keith Olsen while preparing to record British band Fleetwood Mac's 10th album.
We talked about doing a record. And he said, well, where do you want to do it? And I said, well, let's go over to the studio. I'll show you.
And he demonstrated the studio, played Frozen Love, and that is where I first heard Lindsay and Stevie.
Life gave me you there, the change was made.
It's struck a note, to say the least.
A few weeks later, Fleetwood Mac's guitarist Bob Welch quit the band. A desperate Mick called for Lindsay, but Lindsay made it clear that he and Stevie were a pair.
It wasn't really like being asked to join the Beatles. We still believed that we had something to offer as a duo.
I went out and bought all the Fleetwood Mac records to decide whether or not I thought that we could add something to this band, whether it was worth giving up Buckingham Nicks for.
We knew we were giving something up, and I think at that point I didn't necessarily appreciate what it was that we were gaining.
On the first day of 1975, Lindsay and Stevie agreed to join Mick Fleetwood and John and Christine McVie in Fleetwood Mac. Lindsay and Stevie's volatile creative marriage was about to become part of a larger musical family. Coming up, breaking up makes for big hits.
Their relationship started deteriorating, but without that, they wouldn't have written the songs that they wrote.
And later, Lindsay tampers with a winning formula.
As a record maker, I think all of us were a little frightened by it.
When Behind the Music continues.
Everybody's trying to say I'm wrong. I just wanna be back where I belong. World turning.
The veteran English rock band Fleetwood Mac had a new lineup at the start of 1975. As Americans Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks joined Brits Mick Fleetwood and married couple John and Christine McVie.
Lindsey Buckingham! You guys have been really out of sight tonight.
The band's sound and their lives were about to change dramatically.
I remember the vibe and the atmosphere that they brought. They were a couple way down the line, and they were songbirds.
Lindsay has a definite sound, so when he, took me to Fleetwood Mac and we put our style on them, it was a lot of Lindsay.
It was certainly the classic version of the band, for a band that had been going that long, too.
7 months after Stevie and Lindsay joined Fleetwood Mac, the band released a self-titled album. The 1975 release sold 4 million copies and hit #1 on the U.S. charts.
It's weird, I don't feel like I'm doing anything differently than I've been doing for a long time. It's just the way people see us changes,
Right,
but we're still just going along, as insecure as hell.
There was certainly no security in the band's romantic attachments. Just as Fleetwood Mac was breaking out, both of its couples were breaking up. John and Christine McVie divorced, and Lindsay and Stevie were finding it harder to make their round-the-clock relationship work.
We couldn't be together and also work together. It just didn't leave us anywhere to go. I wish all the time that it could have just worked out, Sometimes I feel like everybody thinks it was just me, but Lindsay wasn't happy either.
Once you feel someone moving away, your tendency is to try to grab at it for a while, and that actually makes it even worse.
Everything was kind of so frantic and hectic for them when it was actually happening, and Lindsay, being the person he is that keeps everything inside, we probably didn't get the whole story of how difficult that was for him.
With emotions fully charged, Fleetwood Mac's songs took the place of diary entries.
Loving you isn't the right thing to do.
Yeah, I think almost to a song. The songs that I'm writing are basically directed at Stevie. Hers are directed at me. Christine's are directed at John. Now, unfortunately, John couldn't direct anything back.
You can go your own way.
Even as they broke apart, the former lovers couldn't escape their partnership as musical soulmates.
you had to somehow organize your emotions so that the negative ones and the hurt was somehow pushed over into one corner of the room and then go over on the other side of the room and get on with what you had to do. It may not have been the healthiest thing ultimately.
I think he's her best producer, you know. I've been in the studio all night trying to work out one of Stevie's things, and then I'll hear what Lindsay did and go, oh, yeah, well, that should have been obvious, but it wasn't.
For the next decade, Lindsay would continue to pay a huge price for his high-profile romance.
Most people, if they break up with someone or they're hurt by a situation, they move on. You don't have to see someone every day, much less have to do for them every day.
Reeling from his breakup with Stevie, Lindsay threw himself into a relationship with recording studio receptionist Carol Ann Harris.
She was this little farm girl, or I don't remember where she was from, but we met her when we were mixing Rumours. She was an interesting person.
She wrote down and let me in.
The aspiring model from Tulsa became the newest character in the Fleetwood Mac saga.
The drama of Rumours and the appeal of Rumours was this sort of musical soap opera that was going on, all of which we were living while we were making the album.
I'm done, nothing to say.
When Rumours was released in the spring of 1977, it made history, topping the charts in the US and UK and selling over 10 million copies before winning a Grammy.
And the album of the year is Fleetwood Mac!
Money was pouring in, but Lindsay found credit for his production work was harder to come by. His studio contributions couldn't compete with Stevie's star power, and his former lover was becoming the group's main attraction.
Lindsay had put his whole life into the Rumours album, shall we say. And after all that effort, when the album finally came out, Stevie was the one who was being focused on mostly by the national media, by the worldwide media.
Stevie was also singled out by Fleetwood Mac's married drummer.
What makes you think you're the one?
In 1977, in the wake of her 5-year relationship with Lindsay, Stevie Nicks began a secret affair with Mick Fleetwood.
Stevie and I broke up and never really got together again. I mean, it was not my business what she did.
Lindsay knew. Lindsay definitely found out, and we tried to keep it very secret.
My relationship with Stevie, I still think of very fondly, and she's, to this day, a magical person. I didn't steal Stevie from Lindsay or anything like that.
You know, whatever. That's rock and roll.
The 1977 release Rumours had become the best-selling album of all time, and Lindsay knew the world was waiting to hear what the band would do next. The world was in for a big surprise.
It's not that funny, is it?
First song on Tusk, he says, okay, you got it where you like it? Yep. Everybody happy? Yep. I'm thinking we're going to press record. He says, now, turn all the knobs 180 degrees from where they were right now. And that's basically what Tusk was all about, turning the knobs the other way.
It was such an enabling time for me. I felt I was expanding my musical palette.
Sounds good. I like that track. John, we weren't burned out.
Lindsay's magnum opus was the album's wild title track, a primal oddity recorded live with the USC Marching Band. The album was dedicated to Mick's dad and Lindsay's late father.
Just tell me that you want me.
I spent all those years in Fleetwood Mac without a real father figure, and I think that I really could have used my father during that time.
In 1979, after over a year in the studio, Tusk was finally released. Rumours sales peaked at 18 million. The experimental Tusk sold only 4 million, a multi-platinum disappointment.
So, in other words, if you sell 4 million albums, you've had a failure.
I think he felt responsible for Tusk, as he should have, and at the same time felt responsible for it not doing as well as the other records.
Well, Tusk is still my favorite album. It really gave me the insight into what was important for me. You can't just go out there and do something only for the sales.
Coming up, Lindsay goes insane.
What about that song, Go Insane? I mean, he's crazy. He's really a genius, you know?
And later, the Mac makes friends in very high places.
The Clinton inauguration situation was so out of left field.
When Behind the Music continues.
Bat Boy.
Don't say that you love me. Just tell me that you want me.
The artistic risk Lindsey Buckingham took with Tusk left him creatively inspired, but his musical brainchild was a commercial letdown. And Fleetwood Mac wasn't taking any more leaps of faith with Lindsey.
They all felt that if Tusk was followed by another album that didn't do well, that might be the end of Fleetwood Mac. And I don't think anybody wanted that to happen.
It's questionable, really, whether I would have ever embarked on solo projects if it had not been for the fact that in the wake of Tusk, there was a kind of a group edict that we have to go back to how we did it before.
Taking a breather from Fleetwood Mac, 32-year-old Lindsey released his first solo album in 1981. His quest for creative control included playing all of the instruments.
The solo work was really exploring the left side of whatever my palette is.
Law and Order never hit the top 20, but it did have a hit single, Trouble. That same year, Stevie Nicks released her first solo album. It topped the charts and further established Stevie as a major star.
I took a record to Lindsey and signed it and left it on the floor up against the wall in the main studio, and he never took it home.
For Lindsey, seeing Stevie have a tremendous amount of success without him being involved, he must have analyzed that 1,000 times, probably.
Maybe some not-so-noble things were driving me. I think an overly competitive spirit, maybe competing with Stevie. Wanting to compete just to get the due that I felt was mine.
It's been about 2 years since we've been on the road, but we're here to show you that we just refuse to go away, so.
In an effort to be a team player, Lindsey headed back into the studio with Fleetwood Mac and cut the more conservative 1982 release, Mirage.
It's a difficult position to be in the studio producing a record and having someone tell you you can't use, 50% of the tools you have to offer.
While Fleetwood Mac was getting more conservative, Lindsey's work outside the band got more radical. When Lindsey recorded his 1984 album, Go Insane, some wondered if he'd taken his album title too literally.
Go Insane was really so much darker because I was coming to terms with some personal situations I was not raised to know how to deal with.
Go Insane dealt with the painful disillusion of his 7-year relationship with live-in girlfriend Carol Ann Harris.
I never felt that that was going to be a very healthy thing. I've seen him with several women, and it always ended very unhappily.
I think the specter of Stevie probably disabled several long-term relationships I had. After Stevie, it was very difficult to get closure. There were several relationships that I knew